Hi everyone, I'm Ryan. I'm the creator and designer of the Porta Arcade, which is a fully functional miniature arcade cabinet running off a Raspberry Pi. If you're watching this video on my website or anywhere else, know that I do sell these kits so you can build the exact same thing on your own. In this video, I'll show you exactly how to do that. To build the Porta Arcade, you'll need a few tools and things. Wood glue to glue the cabinet, a clamp or two to keep everything together while it dries, a drill or drill press to drill 4 small holes, a drill bit to fit a number 8 machine screw, a countersink bit to countersink your holes, a Dremel, though if you don't have a Dremel, you can substitute that with a hot glue gun, wire cutters, strippers, and crimpers. So cutters, strippers, crimpers. You'll see in my video I have separate tools for that one all-in-one tool because I do this a lot. Cutters, crimpers, and strippers. You'll need a screwdriver, Phillips, a soldering iron for just a few points of solder, and to wrap everything up helps to have some electrical tape. This is a CAD assembly or exploded view. This is not the assembly method we're going to use to glue the cabinet together. This just shows where all the wood panels go and how they're stacked. Grab all your wood pieces, separate them. We're looking for the 4 speaker bracket pieces. Make sure you glue these mirrored of each other. You don't want 2 identical copies, you want 2 opposite mirrored copies. Set these aside, make sure they're nice and square and even. Before we glue our cabinet together, we're going to Dremel out to reduce the thickness of these 2 button locations. This is so our 12mm buttons will fit this panel. The threads aren't quite as thick for this. After we do that, we're going to countersink the mounting holes for the Raspberry Pi. I'm going to countersink all the holes so the regular B and B plus will fit. This is the bottom panel. First we're going to start with the cross braces that hold the monitor and joystick. Glue those together, then we'll add glue all around the monitor bezel, insert that into the cross brace we just made, and put the top underside marquee. Put glue everywhere on the side, and then we'll insert this whole assembly into one side of the arcade cabinet. Using a lot of glue here will just make things sloppy unless you have a good eye for cleaning up. Repeat the glue on the other side and put the other half of the arcade on. The bottom pieces, which we countersunk earlier, we're going to add glue to just the 2 outer sides and both areas of the finger joint, and then insert this into the bottom. It's good to have an extra piece of wood smaller than this, so when we rest the cabinet, all the joints will lock down as tight as possible. I'm going to add glue everywhere in the sides for strength, front and back, wherever you can, but don't go all the way to the edge on the back. I'll add glue to the bottom of the monitor, and I'm going to squeeze down on the monitor to make sure it's fully seated on that cross brace. Now I'm going to add glue to the front bottom, add that in place, and then put glue everywhere on those seams and up the side. Wipe off the excess. Do this now, don't wait. Wipe it off the bottom. And now I'll add 1 clamp to the front, making sure everything's square before I clamp down. Wiping off some of the grit left over from lasering, and I'll add glue to the front top marquee. Put this in place and wipe some glue off as well. I'm not going to glue the top. It's much easier to assemble without the top glued on. I'm going to add glue everywhere behind the marquee and use a small screwdriver to burst the air bubbles so the glue touches everything. Wipe off some excess glue that might touch the top. I'm going to put the top piece in and the back. Make sure you put these in while the glue is drying, otherwise you can have a cabinet that won't be square, and these pieces will be very hard to get in if your cabinet is glued and it's not square. Do a last check, wipe off any excess glue that you don't need, and let this dry. I'm going to let this one dry for about 6 hours. Now we have our dried arcade cabinet. And we're going to mount the two buttons, the F1 and escape, that go underneath the front bezel. So we'll need the 12mm buttons, some of our female jumper wire. I have 3 right here, or just a set of 3. And we'll need some various colors of stranded 22 gauge wire. So as you can see, we've already dremeled out a portion of the upper piece, since the threads of these arcade buttons are actually less than a 1/4 inch thick, so we had to remove some material so they'll sit in there. Next, we're going to strip the shorter piece. We're going to daisy chain these two for ground. We have our ground in, and now we'll do the signal. So red button, red wire, and black button, black wire. In the meantime, while we're waiting for the soldering iron to warm, we're going to remove the plastic shrouds on these jumper wires. And next we'll take these and insert them into the female jumpers. And finish this off with some solder. And finally wrap it with some electrical tape. My old arcade cabinet kit used to use the Japanese style arcade joysticks. And I really like these because the feel, and as well as like the better brand Sumitsu and Sanwas have all the micro switches broken out to a PCB, and you can easily connect to them with a header cable or jumper wires. But I've switched to the American style or Suzo Hap primarily because I've actually always liked this joystick since, you know, being localized in the United States. I've seen this the most growing up in arcades. As well as the Suzo Hap vendor is local. It's in Illinois, actually. I'm in Pennsylvania. And when you buy in bulk, you get a good deal. And I've gotten a really great deal on their joysticks. So these are the 8-way tournament or competition edition of their joysticks. So these have just the standard micro switches that you must wire to, just adds a little bit of an extra step, but nothing new. And so this is the newer replacement joystick. Now I didn't want to eliminate this from the design because I actually have a few Sanwa brands installed on mine and I like them. So what I've done differently is I've moved the joystick mount inward about a 1/4 inch to accommodate for this larger footprint of a joystick. And what I've done is on the underplate, which is glued like this, I've left both sets of mounting holes. So depending on what joystick you have, it'll either match the outside, or if you have the Japanese style, it will match the inner set of holes. So the compromise here is it's compatible, my kit is compatible with both types of arcade joysticks, But now you have the option of picking the one you want. You can use the default, which is what my kit includes, or if you have your own and want to switch it, both will work. So the top plate doesn't have the holes drilled out, so that's what must be done now. So we're going to drill the outer holes. Make sure you have a backer board to eliminate punch out. Next we're going to countersink the holes we just drilled, so our flathead screws will lie flush when we mount our joystick. Next we'll mount the monitor and its respective parts into the cabinet. If you open your monitor, you'll get the 9-inch LCD TFT. This has a protective piece of plastic on it. You can remove it using this tab, and you can see it in here. It's the extra shine. I recommend leaving this piece of plastic on until you're totally done assembling and you put away all your sharp parts. This is the driver board for the monitor. So you have your HDMI, VGA, composite in, and your DC power in. This is the ZIF connector. This is where the ribbon cable is inserted that connects the driver board to the monitor or LCD. This is the control button for the monitor, so this will adjust your input select, contrast, brightness, and so on, and the ribbon cable that connects this to the driver board. We're going to start by assembling the monitor mount or the input buttons for the monitor. So we'll connect this ribbon cable first, and we'll take the mounting bracket for that. So you need to match this so it faces on the outside and the cutout matches where the ribbon cable is. We'll take all our bolts, and you'll need the shorter number 6s. These will go through, and we'll flip this over and put our black nylon washers, and then wait for it. Yeah, there we go. And insert this like so. And we'll take our number 6 washers, and now we have this ready to go. So we'll set this aside. Make sure if you have the infrared receiver soldered onto this board, bend it upwards so it will pass through. The next thing we need to do is take the driver mounting board. So like this, you want the notch in the upper left, and we're going to mount the driver PCB on the rightermost set of holes. So to do this, put 4 nylon washers over each respective hole, and carefully place this on top, and insert your number 4 machine screws through. And flip it over and fasten with your nuts. and set this aside. So next we'll need the LCD screen. We'll need the mounting brackets and the mounting braces. Whoop. Start with your arcade cabinet and insert the number 8 bolts into the front. And I have this scrap piece of wood that I'm going to use to hold those screws in place. So we've flipped our cabinet upside down. And now I will insert the brackets like so, and then I will lay in our LCD screen. Put the retaining braces on, and lastly place our PCB mount. And insert, hold the assembly together with some nuts and bolts. When you have this secure, pull down on the ZIF connector. Insert the ribbon cable in all the way and carefully clip the ZIF in. And it should be fully seated. So the next thing we're going to do is mount the monitor control buttons into the open slot that we have cut out. So you'll take your assembled piece and you'll want to thread the F1 and escape buttons through and drop this in like so. And then lastly you'll need the cover plate, which cleans everything up, and this is going to drop in like so. And this is the difficult part on film, is lining these holes up and keeping it in the frame. So you'll insert a screw like the number 6 by 1 inch screw like so, and repeat this for the other side. I'm going to use a clamp so this doesn't fall apart, and as I flip it up you'll see both screws inserted like so. We'll add a washer and a nut. The monitor front bezel with the controls for the monitor inserted. And the last thing we need to do is take the ribbon cable from the top and plug it into the driver board, and you're done. Next we're going to mount the joystick. If you're going to mount a Japanese style joystick with the breakout header, to do that, remove the ball top and flip your control panel over. And when you mount this, you'll want the breakout terminals to face the buttons. This way, if you mount it like this, you'll have some interference with the edge of the board and where these wires connect. if you're going to mount the American style Suzo hat, this orientation doesn't matter. So we'll insert 2 of our number 8 bolts. If you're mounting the Japanese style, you can use a number 6. It's a little bit smaller. Then we'll add a washer. And for this, we're going to add lock washers too, since the joystick will get the most use. And these lock washers will keep the nuts and bolts nice and secure. So we'll do that for one corner, then the opposite. And get these nice and snug. Next, we're going to mount our arcade buttons. Now, if you bought the clear acrylic control cover, this is the time to get it out. You need to peel off both sides, place it on top, and you'll thread your arcade buttons through this cover. If you do not have the cover, don't worry, it's always optional. You can always add it at a later time. Otherwise, you'll just be inserting your arcade buttons through. And we'll flip it over. And we'll add the locking plastic nut to each one. Control panel is starting to take shape. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to label the buttons and directions, so when we wear the wire harness, it'll be much easier since we've pre-labeled the button assignments and locations. So you can flip this thing over, and we'll flip it around. And I'm going to label this like I have previously. So upside down, we have B, A, and the right trigger. And the lower will be Y, X, and left. Now, if you, again, have the Sanwa or Japanese style, these pinouts I already have on my website labeled, and they're also in the manual, and you might get these if you buy your own. But with this traditional American style joystick, you'll have to label this by hand. So what you do this is, if you insert the shaft, when you press down, you can see that it triggers this guy right here. So we'll label this as down, D. So the opposite will be up. And if we flip back over to the front, if I press left, we'll flip it over, and you can see it's this guy. So this micro switch is left, and its opposite will be right. So this will save us a ton of time when we go to wire everything up to the Pi. Before we do all the wiring for our control panel and the rest of the joystick for the Raspberry Pi Arcade, let's talk about the fundamentals behind each button and how it works so we can accomplish this task with a little bit more knowledge. So the Raspberry Pi recognizes inputs by button press, and all that does is make a closed circuit between our signal line and our ground. So when you press this button, it closes this path and the signal is made. So that's accomplished with all our arcade buttons and joysticks with a micro switch. So when you push the plunger, it closes the contacts in here, closing the ground and this normally open line. So to do this, what we're going to do is we'll use these crimp terminals and we'll crimp wires into the inside, and they'll connect to the terminal side of all our micro switches. And what we'll do first is connect all the grounds, and we'll separate this just into groups so it's easier to wire and easier to manage. But we will connect all the grounds on our action buttons first, like so. And at the very end, we will take a wire which has this header end, and that will connect to ground on the Raspberry Pi. Then for every action, we'll have a separate wire coming out, and that will connect to the specific location on our header of our Raspberry Pi, or the GPIOs. We'll repeat this process for the rest of the joystick and the extra buttons we have in our arcade. So we've already sort of done this for the F1 and escape buttons. Remember, we daisy chained both grounds, and we had separate signal wires to go to the respective positions on the Raspberry Pi. We'll do this with the joystick in a very similar manner. If you have the traditional Japanese with the breakout, again, you don't need to do this. It's a little bit simpler. But for this, we'll daisy chain all the grounds together. And this last wire will go to the Raspberry Pi because it's ground and it's shared between all four directions. And then we'll take a separate signal wire for each one, and these will all connect to the respective places of the GPIO. To wire our control panel, we're going to start with the action buttons, and we'll do the ground connections first. We're going to insert the micro switches into the respective arcade buttons, and you can do that by aligning. So we want all the tabs or terminal contacts to face in. It's just cleaner to wire. And to do this, we will put the lower tab in first and push down, and the larger tab will just slide and snap in. So we'll repeat this for all of them. And we'll align them like that. And this is the time where you can tighten down on these because we're getting close to their final position. Okay, next you're going to need a bunch of wire for our ground, and we're going to snip it into 5 sections about 3 inches in length and strip the wires on each end. Now you're going to take these 5 links and twist each wire. Until you've got a ground daisy chain. And on the last end, we're gonna strip a little bit of extra length, twist it, and fold it over. Now we're gonna add the crimp terminals. And I'm going to use this crimper to crimp it. So we should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and on the 6th one, you're going to take your ribbon cable, peel off one wire, cut the tip off, strip it, and I like to wrap it around the end here and I'm going to solder this end. And add the last crimp. Now you can connect all your grounds. And the last wire you'll use on your Raspberry Pi. If you're using my image, you can print out this nice sheet. It's going to go, just select any ground and plug that in. So now we'll do this we'll repeat this process sort of for the action buttons. So take another section of your ribbon cable. You'll need 6 for this, and we're going to remove the plastic ends. And you will insert a crimp terminal on top. And now these are your action buttons. So if we plug in, get some room. So we will plug in B and A first. And B and A are green and yellow respectively. So we'll look on our Raspberry Pi, look for B and A, and plug those guys in. And we'll repeat this for the rest. So repeat this process for the joystick. When you've got the control panel wired to the Pi, if you're using the Suzo Hat joystick, you'll need to, you'll have to carefully bend this crimp terminal in just a little bit so it will clear the side of the installation. Do this really slowly and carefully. Next, you'll need the plunger action, the nylon spacer, and the dust cover. So we'll take the shaft of the arcade stick, place the dust cover on, and the shaft spacer, and we'll insert this into our control panel. We'll flip it over, and you'll need to put the action spacer on, get your set washer in, and push everything down, and then insert the set washer. Check for all the action, and with some pliers clip this on. And now your joystick is all ready to go. You can now insert it into your arcade cabinet. And we'll pull our wires out and make sure our Pi are nice and placed. Almost there. Next, we're going to make the speaker mount with amplifier. To do that, we'll need the speaker bracket, 2 speakers, the 2-watt amplifier, wire strippers. These will work. These are better. Screwdriver, assorted nuts and bolts, some wire, and a soldering iron. And if you're going to solder, make sure you're using safety glasses. To get started, we'll mount the 2-watt amplifier first using the top 4 set of mounting holes. To mount this amplifier, make sure the DC jack faces the bottom, or in this case the left and right channels for this amplifier are going to face the left if you're looking at this. So to do that, first we're going to use our mounting hardware, the number 4 bolts and nuts. And we're going to use these nylon washers as standoffs to elevate the PCB from the wood panel, since a lot of the through-hole components stick out quite a bit, especially the screw terminals for the left and right channels. So we'll place our nylon washers on top, mount the PCB, rest it right on top, and then we will place the number 4 bolts through these holes. And take your time aligning all of this. Okay, we will tighten this just so it's snug, not too tight, otherwise we will bend and eventually crack the PCB. Looks good. Now we're going to mount the speakers. So the way this works, we're actually looking at the back of the speaker bracket if you can see the amplifier. So when we flip it over, the speaker is going to be mounted like this. So we'll mount the first speaker. What we'll do is we'll turn it so we find the correct hole alignment. So these are off just by a little, so the inner ones are actually just perfect for this application. And one thing to note, when you flip it over in the back, you want the terminals of the speaker to be as close as possible as to the screw terminals of your amplifier. So we're going to use this orientation since it'll probably match the closest. Now that both speakers have been installed, we're going to solder some wire to them and connect them to the amplifier. So we have red and black for left and right channels. Okay, with my strip leads, I'm going to look for the positive and negative terminals on the speaker, and the black's going to go to negative, and I will insert the lead and bend it backwards like so. And I'll repeat this for the positive side. And now I will solder these to the speaker terminal. I'll repeat this for the other side. Okay, now we've got our wires, and we can make sure that each side will reach, and it will. So I'm just going to clip these in the middle, and I'll strip these leads again. And if you want, you can tin these leads, meaning just put some solder on the end so the stranded wires don't fray if you disconnect and connect to the terminals, but we don't need to do that since we won't be disconnecting these much. And now we're just going to connect to the screw terminals. So R out plus is going to be the right speaker, or the speaker facing your left, because this will be flipped when we put it into our arcade. And then the right channel as well. Twist these wires a little bit. And repeat this for the left. I'll move these jumpers to the off position, and I'll remove this jumper as well. The last thing we need to do is we're going to add the hex standoffs to this panel, which connects the rear panel of the arcade on. It's secure to this. You're going to, on this very bottom hole, insert the large head number 8 screw and screw on this female and aluminum standoff. And repeat this for the other side. And we're done. Now we're going to install the start, select, and volume up down buttons that go on the side. So we'll turn the arcade around, and I'll just use black buttons for this. So we will insert them. And we'll add our signal wires. And these go start and select respectively on the Pi. So we'll have purple for right shift or select, and gray for enter, which is also start. And we'll connect our ground. And connect the ground wire to the Raspberry Pi. And repeat this for the other side. These will be the volume buttons, so I've already made it. Next we'll install the brackets for the speaker mounts. So I've got my 2 brackets already glued, and I'll just put the notch faces in. Put this in like so. My 2 bolts. A washer and a nut. Now we'll take our F1 and escape buttons and we will wire them to the Pi. Connect the DC-Y splitter to the DC power jack on the monitor driver and tuck this out of the way. Take your HDMI cable, plug it into your Raspberry Pi, and plug it into the HDMI port on the monitor driver. And tuck this up and over. Loosen these screws on the top part of the monitor bracket. Take your speaker assembly and drop it into the top. Tighten these screws again. Drape the HDMI cable over, plug the DC power on the other open end of the Y splitter into the DC power of the amplifier. Now we'll mount the Pi inside the cabinet. So we will flip it upside down and insert our screws. Put the Pi rising plate on top. Mount the Pi. We'll put our nylon spacers and fasten it with our number 4 nuts. Take the audio cable, plug it into the Pi and into the amplifier board, and tuck this in. And now we're going to take our volume up and down buttons right here and plug this into the amplifier. So we have volume up and down and ground. So now we can control the volume externally from these buttons on the side. Next, we're going to make the wire harness that connects the DC jack. Depending on your kit, you'll get either this DC jack or this metallic one. We're going to do a center positive configuration because that's what our power supply is configured for. So this pin is going to be +5, or this terminal will be +5. This will be our ground, or negative in this case, and this outer one will be, this guy right here, will be our ground, or negative. You'll need the DC pigtail and a USB cable with the micro USB end for the Raspberry Pi. We're going to cut the normal end off, and you can dispose of that, and our DC jack, or our DC pigtail cable, you'll want about at least a foot to move it around on the inside of the cabinet, and we'll cut the end off. And we're going to strip all these wires so we can access them. And the only wires we need are the power and ground. The data in and data out we don't need, so you can cut these. And we'll also remove the shield we don't need. Okay, set these aside. So Near Design has 4 different size holes ranging from 1/2 inch to, can't recall what that is. So insert the DC jack that fits that you have. And make sure this is the outside, so when you stick it on your Pi, the USB ports line up. And put the retaining ring on. Our DC pigtail and our USB charge, and we'll strip these ends. And we'll twist the black wires together and the red wires together respectively. And make sure you do not cross these strands, otherwise you'll have a large issue. And now that I've got these ends made, I'm going to take some electrical tape and wrap these together so they stay put. And let's go to our DC jack. And I'll move it so we can get to it. And so remember, the center is positive. I had to tin these wires so I could pull them through, and I did a little bit of that off camera because I just can't see with the camera in my way and keep it in frame. So we're pulling the positive terminal through the DC terminal jack. And you should absolutely wrap these with electrical tape, and even some hot glue will help them in case as they bend around they won't short. I've taken some time to clean up the wires here. I'm also using the 2x13 or just the normal Raspberry Pi B stacking extra long header. It's just easier to connect and disconnect controls when I'm building and shooting these videos. So, and I've also twisty tied and taped down most of the controls so they're nice and clean. So I'll plug this into the Raspberry Pi. And now I'm going to put the back panel on. So I need to connect the DC power to my Y splitter. And this will power the amplifier and monitor. And lastly, take my micro USB cable and plug it into the Raspberry Pi. Now I can place the back panel on, tuck the wires in, I'll insert my number 8, and lastly we can put the top plate on. At this point, since you're finished with assembly and if everything looks okay, I recommend gluing this to the top. Don't glue the back on because it's easier to be able to access the back panel when it's not glued. Just gluing this gives you more structural stability and rigidity throughout the cabinet's life, but it's optional, especially if you disassemble your cabinet like I do for videos and whatnot. So now that we've got everything complete, time to insert the SD card that we've preloaded with the operating system. And we'll plug in our 5-volt power.